Open your ears and lube up your butthole. It's time for the What Do We Call It podcast. Now, here's your host. It's Jmann. Welcome to the What Do We Call It podcast. I'm Jmann.
This is Steiny.
Did you know Dave Chappelle was in town?
I heard there was a little bit of an incident.
So they surprise released tickets to a show, and it was going to be on the 18th, I believe. It was going to be at First Avenue.
Yep.
A lot of people were pissed. And then, I think the day of, in the morning, they released a statement all about, oh, we've heard your complaints. We want to create the safest space in the country and blah, blah, blah. So we're going to cancel the show. Well, it didn't get canceled.
It moved to the Palace, right?
Varsity.
Varsity, sorry. Yep.
So not too far. Show still went on. I didn't hear how it went. I'm sure there were protesters outside there too. But what has come out is that it wasn't necessarily that they wanted to create a safe space. Their staff said, we're not going to work this. They didn't have enough people for the event.
Yeah, that's what I'd heard as well, something like that.
I get why people are pissed, but it seems like the majority of them that sit there and say, well, it's Dave and his transphobic jokes, and they're really not. Have you watched any of his last few specials on Netflix?
I have not, but I did watch. I've watched various YouTube clips, parts of it, and also
specifically
he was
the
talking at the
closer
Kennedy
and then
honors.
His latest one,
okay.
What's in a Name. You the one you're talking might have been when he got the Mark Twain Award.
It was actually the year after. He was talking when
okay.
The other comedian who used to be on the Daily Show, actually
Jon Stewart.
Yes, he got it this year, and he was speaking on Jon Stewart's behalf because they go way back and are close friends. Anyway.
I just want to say that as a comedian, you should never have everything you say taken literally, because that's ridiculous. But you can't even discuss trans lifestyle or some of the more confusing or fantastical aspects of what we're being forced to accept in this country. If you try to talk about trans life and you say anything wrong because you're not up on the current terminology,
right? You
get fucking murdered.
Vilified, absolutely, yeah.
And especially on Twitter, so with this whole Dave Chappelle thing, I went and started reading comments on various news sites that were reporting it, and then on Twitter, and people are just like, he's so transphobic. How can anybody even enjoy his work anymore? Here's the thing. In the closer, he discussed someone that he met who was trans, male to female. He discussed an encounter that led to them becoming actual friends in real life, and him doing a show in the area where she lived in California and asking her to open for him.
Okay.
Because she had always said, oh, I wish I could do stand-up comedy. It's been a dream of mine. So he let her fulfill her dream.
So how is this transphobic?
I don't know, because he tells the story about how she went on, and I watched that bitch bomb for 45 minutes hard. It was a thing to see. And he's kind of mocking what happened, not her.
She maybe just wasn't a good comic.
Didn't have a lot of experience.
Sure.
But it was his crowd, so you know what you're coming for, and if you don't know this person, there's kind of a bar that's set when you see an A-list, apex predator level comedian, if somebody opens and their shit's tame.
Absolutely.
You wouldn't see Jim Gaffigan and then sit through him to get to Bill Burr because they're not even fucking remotely close in what they talk about.
Exactly.
And Dave said that he was telling a joke and somebody made some crass comment to Daphne, was her name, and Daphne shouted something back instantly, cut the guy off, and the crowd went nuts. Dave had a special, I think it might have been Sticks and Stones, where he talks about trans life, and Daphne defended him, and Twitter, they just came out and ate this lady alive, shitting all over her for not defending them over him. And Daphne's like, I know Dave. He's a personal friend of mine. He's a good person. He doesn't mean what you think he means. Well, Daphne committed suicide.
What?
Oh my gosh.
Right.
Okay.
So the thing that people aren't seeing about what Dave discusses, everything I just told you about Daphne doing the show and Daphne committing suicide. And he's like, and I know that Daphne had a daughter that she was estranged from, but she had always hoped to reconnect with. And I've started a trust fund for that girl to go to college because Daphne was my friend. Now, right there, he redeems anything you think poor of him because he's doing the right thing. Just because you're mad he's saying the wrong thing.
Right. In their opinion, the wrong thing.
And the joke is, he's like, I cannot wait to sit down with this little girl and say, I knew your father, and he was one hell of a woman. See, laughter's the appropriate response.
Right.
It seems like, oh, what's he going to say? But it's a heartwarming tale. So shit like that, everyone's always pissed off at Dave about. You can't even discuss the trans lifestyle or ask questions because they're just so angry. And so for them to try to get his show canceled, one, you're just going to get it to be more of a media event.
Sure.
He's going to gain
Raise the
more
profile.
followers and traction. You're going to make yourselves look idiotic because you're trying to censor a comedian. Stand-up comedy is sacred in its form of artistic expression, as he espouses in his most recent special, What's in a Name. He went back to his old school, the Duke Ellington School for the Arts. And they were going to name the auditorium for him. And all the students got pissed. They were like, how fucking dare you? He's like, they said all these things that didn't really matter to me because it didn't seem like they had a firm grasp of what was going on. They were just offended for the sake of being offended. So he's like, I cannot, in all good faith, put my name on this if it's going to make these kids this upset. So they ultimately named it the Theater for Artistic Freedom and Expression, which was the purpose of what Dave thinks comedy is. You're waxing poetic on things about life. You're trying to find a funny slant to make weird and horrible things make more sense. That's what comedy is.
Pointing out the hypocrisies of our society.
And even if somebody's like shitting on one minority group or one political group or one religious group, I still want you to be able to say it, even if it's not funny because your delivery is clearly malicious. Poking fun versus like shining a light on something. Like for instance, I've kind of come to the mindset when we talk about abortion in this country. Mm-hmm. And the pro-lifers are like, it's a baby. Life starts at conception. We don't have a widely accepted standard of when life begins.
That's been the big argument, yes.
And the first whatever many weeks that a woman can get an abortion, it's mainly a still developing lump of tissue. And yes, it starts to get like a heartbeat or whatever at X amount of weeks. But I want to ask you this. If I open a set of Legos and I just pour all the fucking pieces on the table, is that a pirate ship? Is that a castle? Is that a space station?
It has all the parts to be a pirate ship.
But it's not a fucking pirate ship.
Correct.
So just like there's a lump of tissue still forming, just like a lump of clay that nobody's really done anything with isn't a fucking statue. So,
you have stem cells, right?
And that's kind of the joke for me is it's like we're sitting here arguing over when life starts, but it's like it's a simple comparison for me. Like, hey, and that's one of the things that smart comedians will do when we're looking at very serious issues. Another one is like trans life. And the big argument is, well, you can have all the surgeries you want, but you're still biologically whatever you were born as.
Right. People can address you a certain way or whatever pronoun you prefer, but right.
And here's what I don't get. If I take my Ford Focus and I slap a fucking Chevy symbol on the front of that grill, it's still a Ford under the hood.
What if you still call it a Chevy, though?
But it doesn't make it a Chevy. So what I'm going to tie with, I talked about upcoming, I would express my probably upsetting opinion about trans life, is I don't think Leah Thomas should be allowed to compete with women because Leah Thomas was a dude not that long ago. Started to transition and went from like a barely ranked fucking swimmer to the top swimmer in the country for females.
Right.
And Dave Chappelle has said, imagine if LeBron James decided he was a woman. Does he still play in the NBA? Or does he have to go to the WNBA where he will score 840 points a game? I don't think it's fair that trans women are competing against biological females who don't have all the same upper body strength and the bone structure and such. It's physically not apples to apples. So let's have the males with the males, the females with the females, and if you want to have a catch-all category where anybody can compete, that's fine. You can't just say, no, you have to bend to our will. You have to compromise.
I'm very progressive in a lot of my opinions. I've always been trying to be receptive to, a lot of the gay community, the trans communities, and, like you said, keeping up with the current status of things, right? Trying to use the proper terminology and all that. But I will admit, when it comes to sports, that's one area I don't have a good answer. When it comes to bathrooms, I really don't have a good answer, right? I don't know the best way forward on this, because you're right, it does create complex scenarios. It does create unfair advantages or disadvantages for one gender or the other. So I think that almost, in a way, you should almost have a separate class, like a third option, right? We've got our men's, we got our women's, and then we've got whatever you want to call it. I think other is too kind of neutral and maybe isn't fair, but that's basically what I'm getting at, is another category that people can compete in. You're right, where it does level the playing field, where you have trans maybe in both, or people who want to compete in that are female or male, that don't want to compete in the regular man or female categories. But to have them compete in the traditional categories is unfair. You're right, absolutely. In college sports, in pro sports, that's not fair to have somebody who started out a man, then became a woman, basically still had all that muscle and bone structure. It's just an unfair advantage.
Well, another thing is, you might not know it just from looking at him. And I will not misgender a trans person on purpose. I refuse to fucking be disrespectful like that.
Absolutely.
And there's the distinction where the trans rights people need to realize that allies come in various shades of gray, and you have to give wiggle room for people to have their varying levels of acceptance. But you look at Buck Angel. I don't know if you know who that is.
No.
Buck Angel does porn.
Oh, okay.
Buck Angel was born a woman. And I'm going to show you a picture of Buck Angel, and you're going to say, how is that not a dude? Because, it is. Now is how they identify. That is Buck Angel.
Holy cow, that's when masculine dude.
Tattooed, muscle-bound, bearded, shaved head. Doesn't have a penis, though. So, Buck Angel is, by everything you can see with your eyes without looking down his trousers, a man.
Right.
He can't use a dick to penetrate another person. He's got a vagina. I've seen it.
Okay.
It's mind-bending, but still. Yes. Okay, so you're a trans male. So what if the compromise is male, female, trans? You want to sit there and say, no, you have to call us by the gender we identify as. Well, you've got a lot of people that can't wrap their mind around that. It's a 2 + 2 = 5 scenario for a lot of us that are like, well, biologically, though, you're not. However, I'm not saying don't live your life. Don't be who you feel you are. Don't be happy. And please don't, because I don't 100% agree with you, say that I'm causing violence against you or causing you to commit suicide, because hyperbole and straw man arguments and false equivalencies do nothing to help your cause. Just be trans. If we say society's progressed, the world has changed, there's a new category. Think of it as a triangle. Male and female on the bottom corners, trans at the top. And I'm not saying at the top. You could fucking flip it and it's at the bottom. It doesn't matter where it is, but it's a triangle. You have 3 options. It's a catch-all. What about non-binary? What about this and that? We'll fucking get there. Maybe at some point it'll be like a fucking decahedron and we'll have all these goddamn options. I was going to say,
either that or you're in the center of the triangle then. You know what I mean?
Pretty much. But accept that we accept you without having to fucking shoehorn all your goddamn beliefs into our brains. And it doesn't make sense, because I can accept that you want to be who you are, that you want to become who you feel you are, and do it. It's fine. It's your body. Mm-hmm. I wasn't exactly cool with seeing the pictures of Elliot Page, formerly Ellen Page. Oh, now I've dead named somebody. Oh my God.
Yeah.
But once Elliot cut his tits off and I saw the surgical scars and shit, I'm like, fuck, like I still see who you were, but I see who you are. So now it's like you're this something new. You're a hybrid consideration of what your gender identity is.
Yeah. Interesting you bring up Elliot Page, because I just watched Inception the other night with Jess, and I've noticed it wasn't the only movie that we'd come across that Elliot is in, that they've updated all the previous. It's no longer Ellen Page, going all the way back to like the early stuff.
Like the credits?
Yeah. Or no, the credits are still the same. Obviously, you can't change those. But as far as like the movie synopsis that they're going to give you in Netflix or who's Amazon Prime, who's in it, it's all Elliot Page, which is, cool. But at the same point in time, I could see somebody who doesn't know what's going on and be like, who's Elliot, right? Like, that girl's Elliot? Well, they were. Now they're not. You know what I mean? So, and far be it from me, that's just somebody's personal understanding. Just because they're uncomfortable doesn't mean that they can't understand it eventually. They just have a tough time figuring it out now. And you're right. Forcing everybody to come to the same level of understanding at the same point in time is not appropriate, right? You may want people to understand and accept you, but you also have to understand that they may take some time to accept that, right? And I think that's what a lot of backlash, especially on the right, is they feel like it's being shoved down their throat. I'm being forced to accept this is the way society is now.
But you're not ready to.
They're not ready to, right? So there are going to be those who take a little bit more time to come to their senses, so to say. And even me, who's somebody who's fairly progressive, even there's things where I'm going, okay, wow, I need to adjust my thinking, or, oh, I didn't realize that was an issue. I had a lot of times growing up in the 90s, everything was gay.
Yeah, you called it gay.
Because it was lame, it was dumb, it was not something that you thought deeper on, right?
Well, we talked about this in a previous episode, is you came to an understanding that I don't need to use that word anymore because I realize that it hurts some people.
Exactly.
Some, not all. There's some gay people that are like, I don't care.
It's funny, right? Go ahead. Because they're the same age as me, and they grew up in the same era, and it wasn't offensive for them, but it has become offensive for others. So, just like the trans thing, some people are going to just take longer to come to that understanding.
Well, I think the whole way to solve the issue, like I've mentioned, is you give people time to accept. You accept on multiple levels, and you come to compromise. It has to be like a peace summit. It can't be the way it's portrayed now, which is all the trans people and their allies are the U.S. Army storming the beach at Normandy, and then the rest of us that are like, what the hell's going on, are apparently Nazis with MG42s mowing people down, getting out of the transport trucks. It can't be like that. The only people that are truly transphobic are those that say, I don't recognize you. I refuse to accept your new identity. You're not a thing. You're an abomination. Like, I don't fucking talk like that. I won't.
Right.
Yeah. I know someone, not closely, friend of friends, very close friend of friends, who is trans.
Sure.
I've only ever known this person as a male.
Mm-hmm.
I've only ever called them by their chosen name now. Apparently they had gender reassignment surgery or reaffirming or whatever you want to call it this week, years ago, has a dick.
Sure.
Okay, so that's somebody that has gone through it. And I respect everything about their identity. I still have to say, your dick is not like my dick. And if you get your dick chopped off and turned into a vagina, your vagina is not like a natural-born woman's vagina.
Right.
Because I'm pretty sure that these surgically grafted hoo-has don't fucking self-lubricate like a biological pussy does.
How could it? Yeah. They're the same glands. There's other things in there besides the skin.
But it's the idea of a forced acceptance of equivalency when there's not. So, again, let's meet in the middle. All right, we recognize you. I don't want to take away your right to be who you are. I will say I'm not totally cool with schools that will have a kid say, I think I'm trans, and then they push, like, okay, this is you now, we accept you. Like, there's one part that's acceptance, and the rest is almost like they're pushing them to the finish line, and then sometimes not telling the parents that the kid has changed their pronouns. You don't hide information about your child. That's not okay.
Right. It'd be similar to, I think, you taking your child to a counselor, right? Somebody to talk to, a professional. If there's warning signs, if there's red flags, if there's something major that the parents need to know, they should be informed.
Well, that's something that if your child decides, oh, well, I renounce my culture because I came from overseas and I consider myself fully American. Imagine if they did that in school and then, like, they didn't bring it up at home because they were worried how their parents would handle it, and the school's just like, we're not going to say anything. As long as the parent's not emotionally abusing or causing harm, you shouldn't hide it. You have to tell them. And then everything after that is when the school can step in and say, fucking stop, or good for you for accepting. As I brought up, the juice is like, oh, I'm a lesbian. I'm like, I don't think you are, but okay, cool. Whatevs. And then one more thing here, I just have to throw this out, is I don't agree with young children taking hormone blockers pre-puberty. This argument that, well, you got to stop it before the body starts to change. And well, what about all the people that you refuse to publish their stories that went through all these different hormone blockers and gender reaffirming surgeries that have gone back and said, holy shit, I wish I didn't do this, that have regret?
That's it. There are aside to this story that does not get enough attention. Absolutely. And it's not saying that we should muddy the waters, but at the same point in time, we should be well informed.
You're not even muddying the waters, in my opinion. You're opening your eyes and you're looking at the totality of the circumstances.
But I'm saying some people, that's how they're going to view it, though. They're bringing in information that challenges that narrative, that whatever they want to set forth now, that we should be free and clear and not have to question it. You're right. I don't know if I agree with giving puberty blockers to prepubescent kids, just because those hormones can change things in your head and who you are, and your body's supposed to kind of develop naturally, right?
This argument that, but you can get ahead of the changes that they have to undo later. Maybe.
Yeah.
But I'm pretty sure that the human body does not develop in a wrong way. It develops how it's supposed to, based upon biology and your parents' DNA and the chromosomes you have when you're born. I realize it's not strictly XX and XY. There's various other amalgamations of chromosomes, but that's how you're supposed to develop. And to sit there and say, well, you got to stop it before it happens. Well, sometimes you got to paint a room halfway the color you don't like before you go, I don't want this.
This ain't going to work. Or this isn't me, right? And
yes, you will have to have surgery eventually if that's the way you go. You might have to take extra hormones to grow a beard when you're older if you're female to male, but I mean, that's a small price to pay from possibly fucking up your overall physiological development with hormones your body's not used to and creating imbalances to try to change. You can't transmogrify through taking pills. That shit does not work.
My biggest thing is I'm not saying that there isn't maybe some instances where, yes, maybe they should give some puberty blockers to somebody, right? For whatever reason. But that, to me, is a case-by-case situation. That shouldn't be the norm. That shouldn't be kind of what we feel that is the standard that we should do for all those kids who think,
forced on us.
I'm not sure. Well, we better put it on pause till you figure it out. No, I mean, maybe in extreme situations there is a medical reason that they would have to, or, maybe this child is, passes so many tests that you're absolutely right. This child is by all intents and purposes male or female, which is the opposite of their assigned birth. Okay, I'm not saying that there wouldn't be an instance where this may happen and may be recommended, but as a whole, I don't think we should be pushing it. I still think people should still be allowed to develop semi-normally.
Well, I also think that once a kid gets to a certain age, you can decide for themselves, like say 16. You have,
sure.
If you want to set a threshold, fine. But I damn sure don't want to see where it's like banned in certain states, like what we got going on with the Roe v. Wade overturn. And it's just this odd juxtaposition where what's the state's right to decide? Well, this is everything about one person's individual struggle and has nothing to do with government. But try to at least have some sensibility about it, that you don't damn someone who goes, I don't want my kid doing that yet. My kid's only 10. My kid's only 12. They're starting puberty. So what? They can't handle the gravity of what they're possibly thinking right now in terms of 5, 10, 20 fucking years down the line, where they're one of these people that fully transitioned and 5 years later they're fucking miserable because they did, and they can't regrow their dick. Right? And they end up committing suicide anyway. Like, because are these suicide numbers for trans youth or trans people in general that they cry from the rooftops about constantly? Oh, the suicide rates are so high.
Right.
Are you including people that transitioned and then had regret?
Right. It would be interesting to know what's included in those numbers. Yeah.
Or is it just not convenient to your argument to say, oh, well, shit, this guy transitioned and now he regrets it, and then he feels like he ruined his body and he's depressed and he fucking hung himself? Well, I'm sorry if it's an inconvenient truth, but it's also a very important number that stands as a lesson to learn to people that rush you through this process. You got to think this shit through. It has life-changing, lifelong ramifications in some cases.
I've got one more point to make about this.
Go ahead.
You and I are both parents. We're both fathers, right? There's a reason why a child is still considered a child up until the age of 17, why you are still their legal guardian, right? And yes, there are many parents who do it wrong, and I'm not saying I've always done it right, but for the most part, you are supposed to look out for the best interest of your child, because your child is a child. They don't have the understanding. They don't have the real world knowledge. They haven't been through enough stuff to gain the experience and the perspective that they need to make some of these decisions. And I'm not saying you need a lot of information if you know who you are and you are what you are. But at the same point in time, I could understand a parent, like you say, in that instant, at the age of 10, their child coming to them and saying, hold on, no, I just let this work at itself out a little bit more naturally here. Let's just pump the brakes. Let's not do all this, puberty blockers, gender reassignment surgery, get it all in gold. Because you're right, what happens in 5 years, if that child's only 16, comes back, the parent, and now has a ton of regret, now you were a terrible parent for forcing them to do this or allowing them to do this.
And how much of it can be undone.
Exactly, right? So
do you just start pumping a kid full of testosterone now because they were pumping their body full of estrogen? Like, what's that going to do to your organs in general if you're just going on these huge fucking pendulum swings of hormone treatments? Like, look what happens with bodybuilders that take too much testosterone and fucking gynecomastia. They grow titties.
Yep, they sure do. It's interesting. I mean, the endocrine system, the hormone system, I mean, that's probably one of the least known in some ways and least understood, especially by the general, public. We can understand, the circulatory system, then even the nervous system, things like that. But the endocrine system is tough because when those things are out of balance, you can completely be a different person. And, sometimes maybe that's all it is. Maybe it's just somebody has a little bit of an imbalance or something a little different. And that explains a lot of why we are who we are. Yeah. Anyway.
So interestingly enough, I've been trying to find a lead-in to talk about this because it's a difficult topic that a lot of people don't want to hear discussed. But the Chapelle thing, because he's been the main champion for expressing how you feel respectfully and then taking all the fucking flack in the world for it. It's like he's just trying to start the conversation. So why don't you have the conversation and leave out the insults and the how dare yous? Because that's not getting anybody anywhere. Fucking throwing rocks. Right? So there it is. My nuanced view of trans life in America. And I will continue to watch Dave Chappelle specials because he is the funniest fucking man and one of the most important human beings we have in general for his cognitive depth. Interact with the show on Twitter, @WhatDoWeCallIt. That is @WhatDoWeCallIt. You can find us on Facebook at facebook.com/group/WhatDoWeCallIt podcast show. For the What Do We Call It podcast, I'm Jmann.
This is Steiny.
And that's the end.